Hello, I was prompted to do this video after I had resolved an issue that a customer had raised. The customer had raised the following issue. During some checks, they had noticed that there was a rapid increase in the physical size of their Tempdb log file on their SQL Server instance. In fact, such was the rapid increase that they were very much in danger of running out of space on the disk drive on which the Tempdb existed. Now, fortunately, I had come across a scenario like this before and was able to track it down fairly quickly, but I thought it would be of some use to the community to see what actually happened and how it could be resolved. Now you can see what we're looking at here is a Powerbuilder a Powerbuilder test window that I've knocked up fairly quickly. And at the top you can see two radio buttons, and below those we have a data window. Now there's a switch between on the radio buttons. There's a switch which allows the data object behind the data window to switch to a data object that will call a store procedure that uses table variables, or if I click here, the data window will switch to an object that uses temporary tables and a store procedure. Now, anyone who works with SQL Server for any length of time, if you worked in depth creating store procedures, you will know that almost all of the time temporary tables behave, or I should say temporary tables perform much better than table variables. Now, if I flick into SQL Management Studio, I have two store procedures, the two store procedures that can get called from the Powerbuilder data window, Powerbuilder window, I should say. First one you can see is using table variables, and the second, with the exact same functionality, is using temporary tables. And both of these store procedures return exactly the same results over 1.5 million rows. Now, just to reiterate, both of these store procedures can be called from this Powerbuilder test window we're looking at. So first of all, I'm going to execute the store procedure that uses table variables. Now, as this takes more than a minute to return, once I click the retrieve, I will pause the video. So after 64 seconds, our table variable store procedure has returned the data. Now, what I want to do is just go into SQL Management Studio and check to see if the call of the store procedure has actually left any open transactions open. So let me just execute this dbcc command, dbcc open tran, open brackets tempdb, close brackets, execute that, and it says there's no active transaction, so that's good, that's not leaving an open transaction open. However, if we then go back to our window and execute our store procedure that uses temporary tables, just click retrieve. This will probably take about 10 seconds. Remember what I said earlier, that temporary tables generally, well, in fact, almost always perform much better in terms of retrieving data, particularly when you have very large volumes of data. In this case, both of these store procedures return over 1.5 million rows. So you can see it's 10 seconds, so that's great. We have increased the performance, but what we want to do now is check if there's a downside to this, because when my customer rang in and reported that the Tempdb log file was increasing in size, one of the things that I wanted to do, one of the things I did was go back and have a look to see what had changed recently in their environment. One of the things that had changed was there had been several store procedures where the use of table variables had been switched to the use of temporary tables, and this was quite effective in getting a performance improvement. but as it turned out, there was a downside to it. And so let's look at the downside. Remember, I've just used a stored procedure that uses temporary tables to do my retrieval. Now I'm going to go back into SQL Management Studio, and I'll do the DBCC open tran again. And this time you can see I have an open transaction still left on my Tempdb database. Now this can have a potential knock-on effect, and the knock-on effect is that while this transaction is open, activity on Tempdb will cause your Tempdb log file to increase in size, and that will happen until such times as this active transaction is closed. Now, the way my customer's application worked was the retrieval using the stored procedure carried out its retrieval, but the connection was still left open. You only managed to close the active transaction when this window was closed, because behind this close button there was a close connection. Now, just to demonstrate that, if I click close and then flick back to my Tempdb on SQL Management Studio, click execute, you see I have no active transactions open. Now, let's go back and run a little test application again, and I'll call my temporary table stored procedure, click retrieve, so our data comes back with a 9 seconds retrieval time, which isn't great, but it's much better than the table variable retrieval. But we go back into Management Studio, and there we have our open transaction again, which is going to give us a problem. So what the problem that we are going to encounter, we can see that if we have some other activity which is heavy on Tempdb, what we can see, and I'll demonstrate this in a minute and illustrate it in a minute, we will be able to see that our Tempdb log file just continues to increase in size. Now, as it happened at my customer's premises, what had happened was someone had run a stored procedure, such as the one we are using in this example. They'd run the stored procedure and went off to lunch, went off to lunch and kept their window open. So the active transaction was kept open for quite a period of time. And during that time, when the customer's employee was out to lunch, there was loads of other heavy activity going on Tempdb. Now, to emulate some Tempdb heavy activity, I am going to just run a script that I've knocked up. Basically, I create 4 temporary tables, and then I'm going to run a stored procedure. I'm going to run a script which will populate these temporary tables. Before I do that, though, I want to show you what the size of the Tempdb file is currently. So I click execute, and you can see it's quite small, 7 meg and 49% used. Now let's see what happens when I run this script. So I'm running a script that is going to populate some temporary tables, and it's let's make these loops. Let's go around the loops a bit more. So basically, it's just a loop that loops around 80,000 times, inserting a record into our 4 temporary tables. These scripts you can probably knock up yourself, or you'll be able to see them on my blog. So let me just run this, and because this takes a bit of time, what I'll do is I will kick off the script and then pause the video. So the script's kicked off, and we'll pause the video. So that took almost over 14 minutes to return, and so it's populated some tables in Tempdb. Obviously, this is a bit of a fabrication, but what we're trying to do here is emulate some heavy activity on Tempdb whilst we have our active transaction open on Tempdb. So remember, we've called a store procedure that uses a temporary table, but that's left an active connection open on Tempdb. And so if we go back to Management Studio, let's just double check that the transaction is still open. It is. Let's see what our heavy activity on Tempdb has done. Remember, our Tempdb size was about 8 megabytes. Let's check it now. And you can see it's gone up to 263 megabytes, or nearly 264 megabytes. So that is quite an increase in size. Now, SQL Server, when SQL Server has a process that kicks in and it carries out a checkpoint. Now, what a checkpoint does, it frees up log space in the Tempdb. It frees up log space for use in Tempdb. So let's run checkpoint, see what that does here. So let's click checkpoint, run checkpoint, I should say. Command completed successfully. Let's see what that's done to our log space. Now, it's actually cleared up a little bit of log space available for use, I think. But the key thing here is that our physical size, the physical size of the Tempdb log file has not changed. And in fact, if we try to shrink our Tempdb log file by using this dbcc shrink file command, let's just see what happens. So if I click execute there, comes back with some results. But if I look at the messages tabs, it says you can't shrink the log file because the logical log file located at the end of the file is in use. So you cannot shrink the log file because the logical log file located at the end of the file is in use, and it's essentially referring to this open transaction here. So you can see how my customer, how his Tempdb log file increased so rapidly in size. First of all, we had an application which used a store procedure, which used temporary tables, and that had been called. And because he had not closed the window, thus closing the connection, an active transaction remained open on Tempdb, and as a result, the Tempdb physical log size just increased in size and kept on increasing in size. And if we ran further activity on Tempdb, and I won't be doing that now, we would see that the Tempdb log file size, physical size, would continue to increase. And you can see log space uses 100% just now. If I ran some more activity, this log file size would increase further to accommodate the extra activity on Tempdb. Now, how can we resolve this? We go back to a Powerbuilder application. I'm going to close this down. So, and I'm now in the Powerbuilder environment. Let's look at our test window. And that's the window that you are seeing when we're doing our retrieval. Now, on the retrieve button, now you forgive the lack of error checking here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to apply some transaction management. So you can see I'm applying a commit here. And what that commit will do is when we call our store procedure that creates temporary tables and populates temporary tables, this commit will ensure that the active transaction is closed once the retrieval has taken place. So let's just save that. What I'm then going to do is I will go into SQL Management Studio. Let's check our log space again. It's up to 330 megabyte. Now, what I can do now is I can, because we don't have an active transaction, let's just check that because I've closed the window, no active transactions. What I can now do is I can apply the shrink file again. Messages, one row affected. So no error messages this time. Let's see what size we have in our Tempdb. And you see that it's been reduced back to its initial 8 megabyte size. So we're kind of back at the start. What I want to do now is to go back into our Powerbuilder application, run the store procedure retrieval for the data window. Remember, I've just added the commit, and after that's happened, we can then check to see what effect our commit has had. So back into the window, click Use Temporary Tables and Store Procedures, click Retrieve. And off it goes. Hopefully it'll come back, and retrieval time 9 seconds. We have the data. And now the key thing is, do we have an open transaction left? No, we don't. So all good there. So in summary, if you are switching from table variables to temporary table store procedure retrieval in your Powerbuilder application, just make sure that after your retrieval that you have a commit, so that you're not leaving an active transaction open. So make sure you have some transaction management, even though you're not updating any user tables, you must have the commit if you're using a store procedure that uses temporary tables. So I'll just flick back into this code again, just to finish off. So in the radio button there, you can see that I am switching the data object, setting transaction object. Again, excuse me for no error checking here. You normally would error check setting a transaction object to make sure that succeeded. And then in the retrieve button, you see we're doing a retrieval on the data window, which if you've clicked the radio button that uses store procedures, it'll be using the store procedure that uses temporary tables. And because I've added that commit using SQL CA, I no longer have an active transaction left open on Tempdb when the retrieval finishes. So hopefully this video will be of some help to you should you come across such a scenario in your own environment or perhaps one of your customers' environments. So thanks for watching.